My name is Arlo Harrington, and at 72, I thought life had already dealt me its cruelest blow when my Elaine passed last month after 46 years of marriage. But fate had another card to play. I was heading to the attorney's office about Elaine's inheritance when a disheveled homeless man grabbed my car door. "Sir, don't go up there, your daughter-in-law." His desperate words froze my blood. If you're watching this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, and hit that like button if unexpected warnings have ever changed your life. The morning sunlight filtered through my kitchen window as I sipped coffee from the blue ceramic mug Elaine had given me on our 40th anniversary. 6 weeks since I lost her, and still every corner of our house whispered her name. We'd built our life together brick by brick since we were 26, starting with nothing but optimism and hard work. Elaine was the kind of woman who turned our modest 2-bedroom starter home into a place that felt richer than any mansion. When we finally saved enough to build our dream house 30 years ago, she planned every detail, from the wraparound porch where we watched 29 summers fade into autumn, to the garden that bloomed with her favorite dahlias. I can still see her there, straw hat tilted against the sun, humming as she pruned her flowers. We weren't wealthy by most standards, but we were comfortable. I had my carpentry business that grew into a respectable construction company, and Elaine managed our finances with meticulous care. We had enough to help our son James through college, take a vacation to the Smoky Mountains every other year, and put a little away for retirement. Or so I thought. The call from Mr. Patterson, Elaine's attorney, came 3 weeks after the funeral. His voice had that careful professional tone that immediately put me on edge. "Arlo, there are some matters regarding Elaine's estate we need to discuss. It's rather urgent." "Estate?" I remember laughing, though nothing felt funny. "Fred, you know we weren't rich folks. The house is paid off, we've got the retirement accounts. What estate?" His pause stretched long enough for me to realize there was something significant I didn't know. "Elaine never told you about her family inheritance, did she?" The revelation knocked the wind from me. Apparently, Elaine's grandmother had left her a substantial sum when she passed 20 years ago. Elaine had invested it silently, never touching the principal, letting it grow while keeping it separate from our daily lives. Her attorney explained she'd always planned to tell me when the time was right, but her sudden illness had changed everything. Our son James took the news differently when I shared it with him over dinner that evening. Where I felt confused, even slightly betrayed that Elaine had kept this secret, James seemed calculating. His wife Diana, who had always maintained a polite but cool relationship with us, suddenly became attentive, calling daily to check on me, bringing casseroles I never requested. "Dad, you need to take care of yourself," Diana would say, her hand resting on my shoulder a beat too long. "James and I are thinking maybe you should consider selling the house. It's too much for a man your age to maintain alone." Each suggestion felt like sandpaper against my instincts. The house was where Elaine and I had built our life. The thought of selling it made my chest ache. 2 days before the scheduled meeting with Mr. Patterson, I noticed James and Diana having an intense discussion in their car parked in my driveway. They didn't see me watching from the window, but their animated gestures suggested an argument. Diana seemed to be insisting on something while James looked uncomfortable, but eventually nodded in agreement. That same evening, I found myself going through Elaine's desk drawer, seeking comfort in the familiar scent of her stationery. Instead, I discovered a folder I'd never seen before. Inside were bank statements showing transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, and a handwritten note in my wife's elegant script. "For Arlo, if something happens, trust only Fred Patterson." Sleep evaded me that night. My thoughts spun with questions about the inheritance, Diana's sudden interest in my welfare, and that cryptic note. By dawn, I had resolved to approach the meeting with caution. Something wasn't adding up, and I needed answers. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully in the navy suit Elaine had always said brought out my eyes. I tucked her note into my breast pocket, close to my heart. Outside, the October air carried the first real chill of autumn. Our neighborhood was quiet, most folks already gone to work, leaves swirling across empty driveways. I started toward my car with a determination I hadn't felt since Elaine fell ill. Whatever was happening, I would face it head on, for her sake and mine. The weight of my house key felt heavier than usual in my palm as I locked the front door behind me. Our maple tree had begun shedding its crimson leaves across the lawn, creating a carpet Elaine would have called nature's welcome mat. I paused on the porch, scanning our street with its neat row of houses where we'd watched families grow, children leave for college, and retirees move south. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt right. My Buick sat in the driveway, recently washed by the neighborhood kid who earned pocket money detailing cars. The morning sun gleamed off its navy surface, a small gesture of respect toward what awaited me. I clicked the remote, hearing the familiar chirp of the locks disengaging. As I settled into the driver's seat, my mind rehearsed what I would say at Patterson's office. The leather felt cool against my back as I adjusted the mirror and reached for my seatbelt. That's when movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. A man was running toward my car, his weathered jacket flapping open, a woolen cap pulled low over his forehead. My first instinct was alarm at 72. You become acutely aware of vulnerability. My finger found the lock button instantly. But something in his expression stopped me from driving away. Desperation, recognition, urgency. He wasn't threatening. He was frightened. He reached my window, breathing heavily, his beard untrimmed and eyes bloodshot but clear. I lowered the window just 3 inches, enough to hear, not enough to be grabbed. "Mr. Harrington," he panted, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Thank God I caught you. Sir, don't go up there. Your daughter-in-law." Before he could finish, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. 2 men in dark suits emerged, moving with purposeful strides that screamed authority without badges. "Harold, that's enough," the taller one called. "You're violating the restraining order." Harold. The name clicked into place. Harold Winters. He had worked as an accountant at James's investment firm until about 6 months ago. I'd met him at the company Christmas party last year. "Mr. Harrington." They're going to try to. Harold's words cut off as the men reached us, one gripping his arm firmly. "Sorry for the disturbance, sir," the shorter man said to me with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Winters has been having some difficulties since his termination. We'll make sure he gets the help he needs." Harold's eyes locked with mine as they pulled him away. "Check the Thompson account," he called out before they muscled him into their vehicle. My hands trembled slightly as I started the engine. Thompson account? The name meant nothing to me, but the fear in Harold's eyes, the warning about Diana, and the professional efficiency with which he'd been removed, it all sent ice through my veins. I pulled out of the driveway, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. Was this connected to Elaine's inheritance, to the strange note she'd left? Or was Harold simply a disturbed former employee with a grudge? My cell phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet car. Diana's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Arlo? Where are you?" Her voice carried an artificial brightness. "James and I thought we'd drive you to the meeting. We're at your house, but you've already left." "I prefer driving myself, Diana," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'll see you at Patterson's office." A pause. "Are you sure? The traffic downtown can be so stressful." "I've been driving these streets for 50 years, Diana. I think I can manage." Another pause. "Of course. We'll see you there then." She disconnected before I could respond. As I navigated toward downtown, memories surfaced of conversations overheard, strange comments that had seemed innocuous at the time. Diana asking Elaine about her family history, showing unusual interest in Elaine's grandmother. James mentioning financial difficulties at his firm, despite record profits reported in the business section of our local paper. The Thompson name suddenly connected to a charity gala Elaine and I had attended last year, Thompson Foundation for Financial Literacy, sponsored by James's firm. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but I could sense the shape of the puzzle forming. By the time I pulled into the visitor parking at Patterson, Gray and Associates, my casual confusion had hardened into vigilant suspicion. I checked my watch. 10 minutes early. I sat in my car, gathering my thoughts, remembering Harold's desperate warning. Then I reached into my pocket and felt Elaine's note, her final guidance to trust only Fred Patterson. Whatever waited for me upstairs, I would face it with the same quiet strength Elaine had always admired in me. For her sake, I would uncover the truth. The Patterson, Gray, and Associates building stood 12 stories of gleaming glass and steel, impressive without being ostentatious, much like Fred Patterson himself. I'd only been here twice before, when we updated our wills after retirement and again when Elaine first got sick. The lobby bustled with the usual morning activity, but something felt off. A security guard I didn't recognize watched me with unusual interest as I signed the visitor log. Near the elevator, a man in an ill-fitting suit pretended to read his phone while monitoring the entrance. "Dad!" I turned to see James approaching, his designer suit impeccably tailored but his face showing strain around the eyes. My son had inherited my height and Elaine's gentle features, but today he looked like a stranger, tension radiating from his normally relaxed posture. "Thought I might catch you before you went up," he said, embracing me with a hug that felt rehearsed. "Diana's already upstairs with Fred." Diana arrived early? I kept my tone conversational while noting how unusual this was. My daughter-in-law typically arrived fashionably late to everything. She wanted to make sure everything was in order. "For you." His smile flickered uncertainly. "This is a big day." The elevator ride to the 8th floor stretched in uncomfortable silence. James kept checking his watch, then his phone, texting rapidly with his thumb. "Everything okay at work?" I asked. He flinched slightly. "Just some client issues. Nothing to worry about." The elevator doors opened to reveal the tasteful reception area of Patterson's firm. Diana stood immediately, her designer dress and perfectly coiffed hair making her look like she was attending a society luncheon rather than a will reading. "Arlo!" She rushed forward, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "We've been so worried about you driving downtown alone. How are you holding up?" Before I could answer, I noticed 2 unexpected figures seated in the waiting area. Frank Donovan, James's business partner, nodded at me with forced casualness. Beside him sat Thomas Reeves, Diana's brother, whom I'd met perhaps 3 times in the 8 years she'd been married to James. "I didn't realize this was a family reunion," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Mr. Patterson thought it would be helpful to have support," Diana explained smoothly. "Financial matters can be so overwhelming after a loss." Fred Patterson emerged from his office then, his familiar silver hair and kind eyes a welcome sight in this increasingly strange scenario. Something in his expression when he saw me relief confirmed my growing suspicion that this meeting was not what it appeared. "Arlo, good to see you," he said, shaking my hand firmly. His eyes conveyed a message. "Stay alert. We're ready for you all in the conference room." As we filed in, I noticed how strategically everyone positioned themselves. Diana sat directly across from me, James to my right, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Frank and Thomas flanking the far end of the table like bookends. Patterson took his seat at the head of the table, arranging several document folders before him. "Before we begin, I should clarify that this meeting is to discuss the specific terms of Elaine's estate and how it will be distributed according to her final wishes, which we're all eager to respect," Diana added quickly, her smile tight. I decided to test the waters. "The strangest thing happened as I was leaving home this morning," I said casually. Harold Winters flagged me down. The effect was immediate and telling. Diana's face drained of color. James knocked his pen to the floor. Frank and Thomas exchanged glances loaded with meaning. "Harold Winters?" Diana's voice had risen half an octave. "The accountant James had to let go for incompetence? What did that man want?" He seemed concerned about my welfare. "Specifically mentioned you, Diana." Diana's hand fluttered to her throat, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "I can't. I need air." She stood abruptly, swaying dramatically. "That man has been harassing our family ever since James had to fire him for embezzlement." James rushed to steady his wife, looking torn between concern and something that resembled fear. "Diana has had anxiety attacks ever since Harold started making accusations. The restraining order was supposed to keep him away from all of us. Fred Patterson watched this display with the measured assessment of someone who had seen many performances in his legal career. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. No, Diana insisted, regaining her composure with suspicious speed. I'm fine. Let's continue. We're all here for Arlo. Patterson nodded and opened the main folder before him. As you all know, Elaine Harrington maintained a separate inheritance from her maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Thompson. The Thompson name again. Harold's urgent mention suddenly clicked into place. What you may not know, Patterson continued, is the full extent of that inheritance. With investments and appreciation over 20 years, the current value stands at approximately $7.6 million. A collective intake of breath around the table. Even I felt lightheaded at the figure. 7 million? Elaine and I had lived comfortably on much less than that our entire lives. Diana recovered first. And naturally, as Arlo's only son, James is the primary beneficiary after Arlo's portion. Something in her phrasing, the presumptuous certainty, raised my hackles. Patterson's expression revealed nothing. The will is quite specific about distribution. But before we proceed, Arlo, would you like a moment to discuss some aspects privately? Diana leaned forward. Anything regarding the estate can surely be discussed with family present. We're all here to support Arlo. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I would appreciate a private word with Fred. The look that passed between Diana and Thomas didn't escape my notice, nor did the way James seemed to shrink in his chair. Of course, Dad, James said before Diana could object. Take all the time you need. As I followed Patterson to his private office, I felt Diana's eyes boring into my back. The sensation reminded me of a nature documentary I'd watched with Elaine about predators tracking prey. Only now I understood which role I was cast in. Fred Patterson closed his office door with deliberate care, engaging the lock with a soft click that somehow sounded final. The familiar space, with its leather-bound law books and dignified furnishings, felt like stepping into a different world from the tension-filled conference room we'd left behind. Sit down, Arlo, he said, his professional demeanor softening into genuine concern. There's a great deal you need to know, and we don't have much time. I lowered myself into the chair across from his desk, bracing for whatever was coming. This isn't really about reading Elaine's will, is it? Not in the way they think. Fred opened a drawer and extracted a thick file with my name on it. Elaine came to see me 6 months ago, Arlo. She was worried about certain inconsistencies she'd noticed in your son's business dealings. Being the meticulous woman she was, she began investigating privately. My throat tightened. What did she find? Evidence suggesting your daughter-in-law is not who she claims to be. He spread several documents before me. Background checks, financial records, and most disturbingly, copies of legal documents with signatures that were clearly meant to be mine but weren't. This is a petition for guardianship, I said, picking up one paper. It says I'm mentally incompetent. Fred nodded grimly. Filed last week, but not yet processed. Notice the signature? It's a forgery, Arlo. They're trying to gain control of your assets and, by extension, Elaine's inheritance. The betrayal cut deep, but a lifetime of weathering storms helped me maintain my composure. Tell me about Diana. Fred placed a folder labeled Reeves, Diana before me. Inside were multiple identity documents with different names but the same photograph. Diana Smith, Diane Sanders, Deanna Richards, all with criminal records for fraud, all with the same calculated smile I'd come to know. Her real name is Danielle Reynolds. She's been investigated for 3 separate financial schemes targeting wealthy families. She's never been convicted because witnesses either recant or evidence mysteriously disappears. Fred's expression darkened. She specializes in isolating wealthy targets from their support systems before taking everything. I thought of her constant suggestions that I sell the house, move into assisted living, let them help manage my finances. It all made sickening sense. And James? My son is part of this? Fred hesitated. We're not entirely sure how complicit James is. Diana manipulates everyone around her. Harold Winters discovered discrepancies in the firm's books that pointed to Diana siphoning client funds through dummy corporations. When he brought his concerns to James, he was immediately fired. Harold's desperate warning suddenly made perfect sense. The Thompson account he mentioned must be connected to Elaine's grandmother's money. Elaine suspected something wasn't right, Fred continued. She came to me wanting to protect you both. We set up a contingency plan. The note she left, I murmured. Trust only Fred Patterson, he nodded. Elaine restructured her will and the inheritance distribution with specific triggers that would only activate if someone attempted to contest the will or claim incompetence on your behalf. A lifetime with Elaine had taught me to appreciate her quiet intelligence. But this level of foresight still amazed me. Even facing her own mortality, she'd been thinking of protecting me. So today's meeting, I began, putting the pieces together, is a trap, Fred confirmed. We needed all parties present to document their intentions. Detective Wilson from Financial Crimes is waiting for my signal. The real purpose is to gather evidence of their conspiracy and protect you from becoming their next victim. The weight of this revelation pressed on my chest, but alongside the pain was a growing resolve. Elaine had set this in motion to protect me. I wouldn't let her down now. What about Harold? Those men who took him. Not police, Fred said grimly. Likely private security hired by Diana or her brother. Harold's been gathering evidence against them for months. His appearance this morning wasn't in our plan, but it confirms they're getting desperate. I straightened in my chair, decision made. What do you need me to do? Go back in there and follow my lead. Ask questions when I signal you. Diana believes you're an easy mark, an elderly widower overwhelmed by grief. Let her keep thinking that until Detective Wilson arrives. As Fred outlined the specifics of our counter-strategy, I felt Elaine's presence stronger than at any time since her passing. She had known, somehow, what would happen, and had laid the groundwork to protect not just our assets, but our son from the predator he'd unknowingly married. One more thing, Arlo, Fred said as we prepared to return to the conference room. No matter what happens in there, remember that Elaine did all this because she believed in your strength. She knew you could handle the truth and do what needed to be done. I stood straighter, feeling a clarity and purpose I hadn't experienced since Elaine's diagnosis. Let's go spring the trap. Fred opened his door, and we stepped back into the hallway. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Diana in animated conversation with her brother, while James sat apart, looking increasingly troubled. They all turned as we entered, Diana's practiced smile sliding back into place. Everything all right? Just fine, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. For the first time, I saw her clearly not as my son's wife or Elaine's daughter-in-law, but as the predator she truly was. Fred has explained everything to me in great detail. Something flickered behind her eyes, uncertainty, fear, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Then let's get on with it, she said brightly. I'm sure we're all eager to respect Elaine's wishes and move forward as a family. Family. The word from her lips was a desecration. But I simply nodded and took my seat, ready for whatever came next. The tension in the conference room had shifted during our absence. Diana's confident smile seemed plastered on. Frank repeatedly checked his watch, and Thomas had moved to stand near the door positioned for a quick exit. Only James seemed genuinely bewildered, his eyes darting between his wife and me with growing concern. Fred Patterson resumed his position, spreading several documents on the table. Now, before we proceed with the formal reading, there are some preliminary matters to address regarding recent filings that affect this estate. Diana leaned forward. What filings? We're here about Elaine's will. Yes, but I've received a petition for guardianship over Arlo, claiming mental incompetence. Fred's tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Filed by you, Diana, and apparently signed by Arlo himself. James turned to his wife in confusion. What? Dad's perfectly competent. We never discussed. It's a standard precaution, Diana cut in smoothly. Given Arlo's age and recent bereavement, the attorney handling our family matters suggested it would simplify the inheritance process. That would be convenient, I said, keeping my voice level. Except I never signed any such document. A heavy knock at the door interrupted whatever response Diana was formulating. Fred nodded slightly to me before calling, "Come in." A tall woman with short gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement entered, followed by two uniformed officers. "Frederick Patterson? I'm Detective Wilson, Financial Crimes Division. I believe you're expecting me." Diana's face went rigid. Thomas took a half-step toward the door but stopped when one officer shifted position to block his path. "What is this?" Frank demanded, standing up. "This is a private family meeting." Detective Wilson placed her briefcase on the table. "This is an ongoing investigation into multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy." She turned to Diana. "Mrs. Harrington, or should I say Miss Reynolds, we have some questions for you." The transformation in Diana was instantaneous and chilling. The warm, caring facade evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. "I have no idea what you're talking about. James, call our attorney immediately." I caught my son's eye across the table. "James, did you know your wife attempted to have me declared incompetent? Did you know about the forged documents?" The genuine shock and horror on his face answered before his words could. "No, Dad, I swear I didn't know anything about this." "He's lying," Diana snapped. "He knew everything. This was his idea." Detective Wilson opened her briefcase, removing a thick folder. "We have evidence indicating otherwise, Miss Reynolds, including testimony from Harold Winters regarding the Thompson account discrepancies he discovered before his termination." At Harold's name, Thomas lunged for the door but was immediately intercepted by one of the officers. Frank remained frozen in his chair, eyes wide with panic. "Harold was fired for incompetence," Diana insisted, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "Harold was fired," I said, finding strength in finally confronting the truth, "because he discovered you were using James's firm to launder money from elderly clients. You targeted my son, married him to gain access to his clients, and when you learned about Elaine's inheritance, you expanded your operation to include me." James looked physically ill. "Diana, tell me this isn't true." Instead of denying it, Diana turned on him with unexpected venom. "You were so easy, James, so desperate for a beautiful wife who seemed interested in your boring life. You never questioned why someone like me would settle for someone like you." Her cruelty struck James like a physical blow. He recoiled, color draining from his face. "That's enough," Detective Wilson intervened. "Mrs. Harrington, we have a warrant for your arrest, along with your brother Thomas and Mr. Donovan." Diana's composure cracked completely. "This is ridiculous. You have nothing concrete. It's the word of a senile old man and a disgruntled ex-employee against mine." "Actually," Fred interjected, "we have considerably more than that. Elaine Harrington suspected your schemes months ago and began gathering evidence. She established a trust with very specific conditions that would only activate if someone attempted to gain control of Arlo's assets through fraudulent means." He slid a document toward Diana. "This is a complete forensic accounting of the money trail from James's clients through your shell companies. Elaine hired private investigators when she became suspicious of your sudden interest in her family history." I watched Diana's face as the magnitude of her miscalculation dawned on her. She had underestimated Elaine completely, dismissed her as an unimportant obstacle. "You never saw her," I said quietly. "You looked at my wife and saw an old woman, someone easily overlooked. That was your mistake." Diana's desperation turned to rage. "None of this will hold up. You think I haven't covered my tracks? You think this is the first time I've been investigated?" She turned to James, her expression suddenly pleading. "James, they're trying to tear us apart. Your father has always been jealous of our happiness. He and your mother never approved of me." James stood slowly, his voice barely audible. "Stop. Just stop, Diana. I can see it all now, how you isolated me from my friends, how you always discouraged me from spending time with my parents, how you pushed me to convince Dad to sell the house after Mom died." Diana's strategy shifted again, her eyes hardening as she realized James wouldn't be manipulated any longer. With a sudden movement, she lunged for Fred's portfolio, sending papers flying across the conference table. "Nobody can prove anything without documentation," she snarled, grabbing for the forensic accounting report. The officers moved quickly, but not before Diana had scattered files across the floor. She fought their restraint, a cornered animal now rather than the poised predator of moments before. Detective Wilson calmly gathered the documents while Diana continued struggling. "Danielle Reynolds, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, forgery of legal documents, and attempted exploitation of an elderly person." As the detective read her rights, Diana's wild gaze locked onto me. "This isn't over, old man. You think you've won, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections you can't imagine." Her threats might have been intimidating if I hadn't seen through her act completely now. This woman had nearly destroyed my son, had plotted to steal everything Elaine and I had built, had likely ruined countless others before us. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I replied steadily. "A leech who preys on people's trust and goodness. Elaine saw through you. Harold saw through you. And now everyone in this room sees you for exactly what you are." At the word leech, Diana's eyes went wide with recognition. It was what Harold had called her in his final confrontation at James's office. The realization that her carefully constructed world was truly collapsing seemed to hit her all at once. Her knees buckled, her eyes rolled back, and the woman who had terrorized my family fainted dead away at the revelation of her true identity. As the officers lifted her unconscious form, James approached me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know what she was doing. Can you ever forgive me?" I embraced my son, feeling his body shake with sobs of betrayal and relief. "There's nothing to forgive. She fooled us all." I held him at arm's length, looking into eyes so like his mother's. Almost all of us. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of statements, signatures, and revelations. Detective Wilson set up temporary headquarters in Fred Patterson's conference room, where the full extent of Diana's operation gradually came to light. "She's worked this scheme in 3 different states," the detective explained, as James and I sat shell-shocked across from her. "Different names, same methodology. She identifies wealthy families with isolated heirs, integrates herself through marriage or friendship, then systematically takes control of their assets." James stared at the wedding photo the detective had placed on the table. Diana with her previous husband, an elderly widower who had died under questionable circumstances after changing his will in her favor. "How did I not see it?" James whispered, more to himself than to us. Detective Wilson's expression softened slightly. "These people are professionals, Mr. Harrington. They're expert manipulators who isolate their victims from anyone who might notice the warning signs." I placed my hand on my son's shoulder, feeling the tension in his frame. "Your mother saw what we couldn't. She protected us both." As we left the police station that evening, James insisted on coming home with me rather than returning to the house he'd shared with Diana. We drove in silence through streets now dark with early autumn nightfall, each lost in our private thoughts. At home, the house welcomed us with familiar creaks and shadows. I made up the guest room that had once been James's bedroom, finding clean sheets in the linen closet where Elaine had always kept them, perfectly folded and smelling faintly of lavender. We sat at the kitchen table with sandwiches neither of us had the appetite to eat. The reality of Diana's betrayal seemed to press down on the space between us. "She had divorce papers ready," James finally said, breaking the silence. "I found them in her desk when the police let me gather some clothes. Already filled out, just waiting for signatures. Once she had control of Mom's inheritance, she was planning to leave with everything." My heart ached for my son. "I'm so sorry, James." "No, I'm sorry, Dad." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I brought her into our lives. I fell for her act completely. And the worst part is I started believing her when she said you and Mom were interfering, that you didn't want me to be happy. Divide and conquer," I said, "the oldest strategy in warfare. Detective Wilson says they found evidence at our house. Bank statements, fake IDs, correspondence with Thomas about their next targets." James pushed his plate away. "I was living with a complete stranger for 8 years. The doorbell's unexpected chime startled us both. At nearly 11 at night, visitors were unusual in our quiet neighborhood. James moved to answer it, tension visible in every line of his body. He returned moments later with Harold Winters, the homeless man whose warning had started this cascade of revelations. Up close and in proper light, Harold looked less desperate than he had that morning, though still disheveled and exhausted. "Mr. Harrington," he said, extending his hand. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, but the detective said you might be willing to hear me out." I gestured to an empty chair. "You tried to warn me this morning. I think hearing you out is the least I can do." Harold sank into the chair, the weight of months evident in his movements. "I was Diana's first target at the firm," he explained. "She tried to befriend me, get access to client accounts through me. When that didn't work, she planted evidence suggesting I was embezzling funds." James winced visibly, and I believed her without question. "She was very convincing," Harold acknowledged without rancor. "By the time I figured out what was really happening, I'd lost my job, my reputation, eventually my apartment. Nobody would listen to the crazy homeless guy accusing the boss's wife of fraud." "But you kept trying," I said. Harold nodded. "I kept records of everything I could find, followed her when possible. That's how I knew about the guardianship petition. I overheard her discussing it with Thomas at a coffee shop. The three of us talked long into the night, comparing notes and filling in gaps. Harold explained how Diana's brother had hired men to intimidate him whenever he got too close to exposing them. James revealed more details about the financial irregularities at his firm that now made terrible sense. By dawn, I had made a decision. "Harold, you need a place to stay and time to rebuild your life. I have a spare room and could use some help around the house. Consider it thanks for trying to protect a stranger." His eyes widened. "Mr. Harrington, you don't have to. Call me Arlo. And I know I don't have to. I want to." The following weeks brought a parade of legal proceedings. Diana, Thomas, and Frank were denied bail due to flight risk. The evidence against them mounted daily as more victims came forward and financial records were untangled. James faced his own challenges. Though cleared of criminal wrongdoing, his firm's reputation suffered. He spent long days testifying to regulators and reassuring clients. Nights were spent at my house, slowly rebuilding the relationship that Diana had nearly destroyed. 1 month after Diana's arrest, James and I sat in the visitors area of the county jail. She had requested this meeting repeatedly, and after much deliberation, we had decided to hear what she had to say. She entered wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back severely, all glamour stripped away. Yet something in her bearing remained unnervingly confident. "James," she said, ignoring me completely, "you need to drop these ridiculous charges. You know I was only doing what was best for us." James met her gaze steadily. "There were 17 victims before my family, Diana. Or should I call you Danielle? The charges aren't going away." Her mask slipped then, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You'll never make this stick. My attorneys will destroy your credibility. By the time I'm finished, everyone will believe you were the mastermind." "That would be more convincing," I interjected, "if Harold hadn't recorded your conversation with Thomas at Westfield Park 3 weeks before your arrest. The one where you detailed exactly how you planned to have me declared incompetent." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across her face. "You're bluffing." "Elaine wasn't the only one who could plan ahead," I replied. "Once Fred Patterson explained what was happening, we made sure every conversation with you was documented." Diana's composure cracked entirely then. She lunged forward, stopped by the restraints on the table. "You stupid old man. You think you've won? People like you are easy targets because you trust too easily. There will always be someone like me, and next time you won't have your precious wife to save you." A guard stepped forward at her outburst. James stood, shaking his head sadly. "Goodbye, Diana." As we walked out into the crisp autumn afternoon, James exhaled slowly. "Thank you for coming with me. I needed to see her one last time, to understand it was really all an act. Some truths we have to face head on," I said, thinking of Elaine and her quiet courage in her final months. "It's the only way to truly move forward." Back home, I found Harold on the back porch, repairing a loose railing. In the weeks he'd stayed with us, color had returned to his face, and the haunted look in his eyes had begun to fade. He'd been instrumental in helping the prosecution build their case, his meticulous records providing crucial evidence. "How did it go?" he asked, setting down his hammer. "As well as meeting a sociopath can go," James replied with a grim smile. "But it's done now." That evening, the three of us shared a meal at Elaine's cherished oak dining table. There was a moment when I glanced up and could almost see her sitting in her usual place, nodding approval at the healing beginning to take place under her roof. "To Mom," James said suddenly, raising his glass of water. "The smartest woman I've ever known." Harold and I raised our glasses in silent agreement. Outside, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the yard, nature's reminder that endings always contain the seeds of new beginnings. 6 months passed, bringing spring's renewal to a world that had been shaken to its foundations. The Bradford pear trees Elaine had planted along our driveway 20 years ago bloomed in a profusion of white, their beauty bittersweet, without her to appreciate it alongside me. James had moved back to his own place, a smaller house across town, free from the memories of his life with Diana. He visited regularly for Sunday dinners, often bringing case files to review with Harold, who had become an invaluable consultant in identifying and preventing financial fraud. Diana's trial had concluded with a 15-year sentence. The evidence against her and her accomplices had been overwhelming, with victims from multiple states testifying to her elaborate schemes. Thomas received 12 years, while Frank, who had eventually cooperated with prosecutors, was serving 8. The inheritance that had triggered Diana's final play remained largely intact. After careful consideration, I had established the Elaine Harrington Foundation for Fraud Prevention and Elderly Protection, using a portion of the funds to create educational programs and support services for victims. Harold had been my first hire, his first-hand experience making him uniquely qualified to recognize the warning signs of predatory behavior. His apartment above the garage gave him independence while keeping him connected to the family he'd helped save. On this particular evening, James arrived with unexpected news. "Dad, I wanted to tell you in person. I've been seeing someone. Her name is Sarah. She's a prosecutor who worked on Diana's case." The caution in his voice revealed his lingering wounds. After Diana's betrayal, trusting again didn't come easily. "That's wonderful, James," I said, meaning it. "When do I get to meet her?" "She's actually waiting in the car. I wanted to check with you first." His smile was nervous but genuine. "She's nothing like Diana, Dad. She's honest and straightforward and kind." "Then what's she doing sitting in the car? Go get her." As James hurried out, Harold appeared from the kitchen. "New girlfriend?" "Apparently." "A prosecutor." Harold chuckled. "Well, that's a 180 from a criminal mastermind." Sarah proved to be everything James had described: unpretentious, warm, and genuinely interested in getting to know us. Throughout dinner, I watched my son relax in her company, glimpsing the man he had been before Diana's manipulation had twisted his perceptions. Later that evening, after they'd left and Harold had retired to his apartment, I found myself drawn to the backyard garden where Elaine's favorite bench sat beneath an old maple tree. The night air carried the scent of newly bloomed flowers, a sensory reminder of countless spring evenings shared with my wife. "You would approve of Sarah," I said aloud, feeling Elaine's presence in the gentle breeze. "She looks at James the way you always looked at me, like she sees who he truly is and values it." The next morning, I drove to Mountain View Cemetery where Elaine rested beneath a simple headstone. I brought fresh daffodils, her favorite spring flower, and sat on the small bench beside her grave. "We made it through, Elle," I said, arranging the flowers in the built-in vase. "Just like you knew we would. James is healing. The foundation is helping people who've been through what we experienced. Even Harold has found his purpose again." A cardinal landed on a nearby monument, its brilliant red plumage catching the morning light. Elaine had always pointed them out, considering them messengers of hope. "I understand now why you kept the inheritance separate all those years. You weren't hiding it from me, you were protecting it for when it might truly be needed." I traced the engraving of her name with weathered fingers. "Your foresight saved us all." The realization that had been forming over these months of recovery finally crystallized into clarity. The true inheritance Elaine had left wasn't the money that had nearly destroyed us. It was the wisdom to recognize authentic connection in a world where too many relationships were built on transaction rather than trust. Diana had seen people as resources to be depleted and discarded. Elaine had seen them as beings to be treasured and protected. The contrast couldn't be more stark, nor the lesson more vital. Back at home, I found an unexpected visitor waiting on my porch. Mr. Abernathy from next door, his expression troubled. "Arlo, I hate to bother you, but my grandson is visiting, and he's gotten himself into some financial trouble with one of those online investment schemes. After what happened with your daughter-in-law, I thought maybe you might have some advice." I invited him in, called Harold from his apartment, and together we spent the afternoon helping Mr. Abernathy understand the warning signs of fraud and how to help his grandson extricate himself before more damage was done. As he left, visibly relieved, Mr. Abernathy paused at the door. "You know, Arlo, that foundation of yours is doing important work. Elaine would be mighty proud." His words stayed with me as I prepared dinner that evening. The painful journey of the past year had transformed into something neither Elaine nor I could have anticipated: a mission to protect others from the predators who viewed vulnerability as opportunity. In my 73rd year, I had found an unexpected purpose born from betrayal and loss. The foundation was growing, receiving calls from across the country. James and Sarah were developing educational materials for high schools and senior centers. Harold was training a small team of survivors to recognize and report suspicious activities. From Diana's attempt to destroy us had emerged a network of protection and awareness that would help countless others avoid similar fates. That night, as spring rain tapped gently against the windows of the home Elaine and I had built together, I understood the final lesson of our ordeal. The most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the wisdom to recognize true worth in others, and the courage to stand against those who would exploit trust for personal gain. "We're making a difference, Elle," I whispered into the quiet house. "Just like you always did." In the bedroom that still held echoes of 46 years of shared lives, I opened Elaine's bedside drawer and removed the journal she'd kept during her illness. I had been unable to read it until now. The pain too raw, too immediate. Tonight felt different. Tonight I was ready for her final words, her parting wisdom. The last entry, written just days before she passed, brought tears and smiles in equal measure. "My dearest Arlo will face challenges after I'm gone. I've done what I can to protect him, but his greatest protection has always been his own generous heart and clear sight. Some might see these qualities as weaknesses to exploit, but they are his true strength. In a world that often mistakes cruelty for power, Arlo's capacity for kindness and forgiveness is the rarest power of all. This is what I leave him: the certainty that genuine love endures beyond any attempt to corrupt or diminish it." In that moment, surrounded by the home we had filled with decades of honest love, I felt peace settle over me. Diana and her schemes had failed, not just because of Elaine's careful planning, but because what we had built together was too authentic to be truly undermined by deception. The foundation of trust we had established had withstood the greatest attack imaginable, and in doing so, had grown strong enough to help others build their own defenses against those who would prey upon the vulnerable. If you've experienced betrayal or deception in your own life, know that it doesn't define you. The wisdom you gain from surviving such experiences can become a light guiding others toward safety. What was your turning point moment when you realized something wasn't right in a relationship or situation? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey of overcoming betrayal resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that true strength often emerges from our most painful challenges. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes our greatest protection is our ability to trust our instincts, even when others try to convince us otherwise.